The world has moved on and time has grown strange.
Car's a wheel, Doc.
Ka? What does Ka mean?
It means you're playing someone who's going to destroy you.
All things serve the bean.
Tell the man in black I say hello.
The world as Roland had always known it would be swept away. It starts here. From its field of roses, the dark tower cries out in its beast's voice. Time is a bass on the water.
Hello and welcome to Tower Junkies, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. Tower Junkies is a podcast celebrating the work of Stephen King, hosted by two lifelong constant readers. We do non-spoiler and spoiler reviews of King's published work and take a critical look at his film and television adaptations as well. We also discuss the latest King news and check in with each other on our ongoing King obsessions. It's the podcast where all things serve the King. You can find more of our work, including a full archive of our episodes, at towerjunkiespod.com. You can also like the Facebook page at facebook.com/towerjunkiespod and follow us on Twitter and every other level of social media at towerjunkiespod. And if you'd like to support what we do here, you can become a patron at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer for a ridiculous amount of bonus content, both Stephen King related and Obsessive Viewer related and anthology related. It's everything. Spread across all of ObsessiveViewer.com's various podcasts. But if you just want Stephen King Patreon content, there is a tier for the $4 Stephen King specialty tier where you get just filtered out anything. All you get is a filter of the Patreon content that's all related to Stephen King. So anyway, again, that's at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. I'm one of your hosts, Matt Hurt, and today on the show, we are starting our podcast journey to the Dark Tower with a look at The Gunslinger, Chapter 1, aptly titled The Gunslinger. And joining me to do that, of course, is my commate, Tiny. Hi, Tiny. How are you doing this evening?
Hey, buddy, I'm good. I'm not sure how much I love the word commate.
Yeah, well, we're two mates, bound by Ka, to speak into microphones about Stephen King and other stuff.
At least most people who are listening to this understand what Ka is, and it doesn't sound as weird or crazy to them.
Exactly. That's weird because, like, you showed me your new tattoo. You got a Polish tattoo thing, because of your Polish ancestry. I got your face on my chest with Commate underneath it. I'm kind of regretting that now. So anyway, So Tiny, how's it going? Are you excited for this episode?
Awesome. Yeah, I'm doing good. Yeah, I am excited to record this. We had to cancel once, and I listened to this a few times, and so it's been good 2-3 weeks. So yeah, really ready to get into it.
Nice. So same here. I'm really excited to start really diving deep into this series, because it's our favorite thing. It's the reason we started this podcast. And really, one of the things I'm so excited about doing is going piece by piece and going part by part and just really spending time dissecting certain sections of the story. I think that's going to be a really fun experience for us. Going forward with this. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. So, I just had to pause and cough really quick, but anyway, so yeah, I should say before we get into our Stephen King news and check-ins, I do want to say that, once again, I'm going to plug Patreon, but I'm going to plug Patreon in regards to what we're doing here. And what I mean by that is that we're going to be doing Tower Junkies episodes for, every step of the way through the Dark Tower saga. I don't know. I can't commit to how long that's going to take us. I don't know. It's not going to be like every episode going forward isn't going to be a Dark Tower episode, but we're going to do it in a hopefully timely fashion. But having said that, whenever we do a Dark Tower episode on Patreon, we will have exclusive content regarding or related to Stephen King and the Dark Tower. So, for instance, what we're doing is we're calling it the Wheel of Ka episodes on Patreon. So instead of recording a B-roll episode like we usually do, where we're just kind of riffing and talking and catching up and everything, we have like a prompt that we follow, and we're going to kind of talk about that on Patreon. Now, the thing about the Patreon stuff is that it's going to be spoiler heavy. So if you're just going through the Dark Tower for the first time with us, I would say maybe don't check out those Wheel of Ka episodes on Patreon, but those Patreon recordings are available to the $4 Patreon tier. That's for Stephen King content only. Or I think I'm going to put them on the $2 tier as well, and $5 and $10. But anyway, the $4 Stephen King tier is kind of the sweet spot where you can get everything, including the commentary tracks that I do. That's also for the $5 tier. So anyway, this time we discussed how Roland's first appearance read within the context of the whole series. And it was a fun little discussion, and we talked a lot about our history with the series and everything as well. So how'd you feel about that, Tiny?
Pretty good. I like the idea of doing that because we're multi-time readers, and so we have obviously not a unique perspective, but that's something that we could give to our other listeners, I guess, that have read this before.
Yeah. I agree. And the plan also for me is that I'm also going to be covering, hopefully, the Dark Tower comic books on Patreon alongside our reading and everything. So initially I was going to skip over to the Gunslinger comic series that kind of does the Gunslinger. But I'm actually going to go publication order, so that's also going to be kind of spoilery as well. So I'm sorry, but excuse me, Jesus, I'm so sorry. But basically I'm starting with the Gunslinger Born, which is the first, Dark Tower comic graphic novel from Marvel. And then I'm going to do the Long Road Home. So I have a whole stack. We're going to do that. It's going to be fun. But also on that note, I guess we can go into Stephen King news and check-ins, because I just realized that I have a news item related to that. Do you want us to go into that, Tiny?
Yes, sir. Let's do it.
Okay. So as I said, I'm going to be reviewing the comic series on Patreon, and then we might do like an episode here or there on the main feed when I finish the comic series and everything. But I do want to mention that so the comic books are interesting, and now this is when we're getting into the news and check-ins and everything. So the comic books are interesting because they're Marvel, but they are in the process. I thought that they had already been republished by, I think it's like Gallery 13 is the imprint that's publishing it. Gallery 13, yes. But instead, it hasn't come out yet. So they're publishing 3 omnibuses, one for each kind of series of graphic novels. They're all the same comic books, the same graphic novels that Marvel had, but they're just rebranding it. So the first series, which covers basically Roland in Magus, most of Wizard and Glass and the aftermath of Wizard and Glass, they're rebranding that as Stephen King's The Dark Tower Beginnings. In the complete graphic novel saga, that is going to run you $100 on Amazon. It's available to pre-order because it's not coming out until September 28th of this year. And then the next series is The Gunslinger, which recounts the Gunslinger, of course. And that comes out October 26th, 2023. That'll also run you $100. And then finally, the last series is, of course, the Drawing of the Three. They're going to have an omnibus that's also going to be $100. That's going to come out in November of this year. So I'll put affiliate links in the show notes. So if you want to pre-order it and everything, if you want to go to our show notes at towerjunkieспod.com/085, click the link on those show notes, and then pre-order it from there, and then we'll get a little bit of a commission on the sale. The cover art looks really cool. I don't know if I'm going to spring for them. Because I have the original like Dark Tower omnibus, the Gunslinger omnibus, which actually fetches a pretty big price on Amazon these days. I think it's like on sale for like $350 or something.
Wow.
Yeah. But I do have the Dark Tower ones, the what's being rebranded as the beginnings. I have all of those in individual volumes, so I'm like, a box set of those, that looks really appetizing, so I don't know. Yeah, so I don't know.
That's cool. I didn't know they were doing that. That's really awesome. I'm definitely going to get them.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you own any of the comics in physical form?
I own quite a few of them, but I think some of the later ones I don't have. So
yeah, I really wish they would have gone through the whole series and everything, but apparently it got canceled at some point. I'm not sure, but I'm gonna dive through them for Patreon. So it'll be fun.
Sweet.
So again, that's on Amazon. Check the show notes for links and everything. Couple other pieces of news that I have. So, Tiny, the new Children of the Corn movie, have you seen the trailer, or it's in theaters right now?
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
Yeah.
I have not seen the trailer.
Okay. Here's the thing with the new Children of the Corn movie. It was shot in 2020, from what I understand, and it was shelved for until now, and it's getting a sizable enough to where it's playing here, theatrical release. But the reviews have been overwhelmingly negative, and the trailer looked very kind of just cheesy and slapped together. I was going to see it this weekend, but I just kind of didn't have the motivation. So maybe I'll see it like later this week and report back. Maybe I'll do like a solo episode or something, because I don't want to force you to go to the movie theater to see a movie that is probably going to be garbage.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Have you ever read Children of the Corn or seen the original movie? I feel like I've asked you that before, I'm sure.
I think you have. I have not read it, but I think I've seen maybe the first movie, I want to say. I can't really remember.
Yeah, I don't really remember it all that well either. I really like the short story, which also I covered Night Shift on Patreon, so another incentive for Patreon. But I have a whole bunch of reviews of Stephen King short fiction on there, The Church of King. But anyway, the short story is really good. But I feel like the original movie felt a little bit cheesy to me last I remember seeing it. And I don't know, this movie it looks like one of those adaptations that kind of just takes a bit of a concept from the story and doesn't really, like, it's not like a straight adaptation of it, which is fine. Like, you don't need to adapt it exactly every time. But it also just kind of seems like they didn't really go, I don't know, it didn't really seem like there was much of an interesting angle for it for me to be interested enough to see it. So, yeah, but I don't know. I'll see it eventually and report back, I'm sure. So, I don't know.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. The other piece of news that I have is King on Screen, which is a Stephen King documentary. It's coming to theaters this summer. Very excited about this. So I have a link to the Bloody Disgusting article in the show notes. Basically, I'm going to read from it a little bit. The documentary, approved by Stephen King, will hit theaters in late summer with a digital release to follow in the fall. King on Screen offers audiences an intimate sit-down with directors who have adapted King's work for the screen, looking at the movies and shows that have brought his body of work an entirely new life, both the ones that reach the top-tier echelons of pop culture history and those that fell by the wayside into obscurity. Among those sitting down for interviews for the film, which actually had its world premiere at Fantastic Fest last year, are Frank Darabont, Mick Garris, Mike Flanagan, and Greg Nicotero. So I'm very curious about that. Very interested to see that. How do you feel about it, Tiny?
Yeah, that sounds really awesome. If for no other reason than someone will be putting a camera in front of Frank Darabont.
Yeah,
because he's so blacklisted right now, basically.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, such a shame. Given how talented he is and how much we like him,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm very curious to see what he has to say about his work in the Stephen King verse.
Mm-hmm.
And even his friendship with King as well.
Right.
So the last piece of news I have is pretty stupid. Basically, like Stephen King, he had tweeted at I don't know. I have a link here. It's Nick Adams' War of Words with Stephen King snowballed into a controversy with several people coming out in support of the iconic writer. So, Nick Adams, who I don't really know what his deal is. He's an asshole like Twitter troll person, conservative, whatever. So he hates anything that, advances, society in meaningful ways. But anyway, he said, he tweeted, "This is near Los Angeles," where it's a video of snow. And it says, where is your global warming now, liberals? And so Stephen King replied and said, "Were you born stupid or did you work at it?" Which I think is a pretty good burn. And Adams responded, which by the way, Nick Adams, his Twitter handle is Nick Adams in USA, and his display name is Nick Adams, and in parentheses, alpha male. So that should tell you everything you need to know about him. And here's the thing. He said, his dumbass response was, "Your books are shit. Try writing something real America cares about." And then a bunch of people kind of dragged him online and said another first grader response to one of the biggest best-selling authors in the world. And that America cares about, bro. The Shining sold 700,000 copies and was adapted into a movie that grossed nearly $50 million at the box office. Sure, buddy, Americans don't care. But anyway, that it's annoying, but also it goes back to my major gripe with the Twitterverse, and really it comes down to just conservative echo chambers. But the idea that Stephen King doesn't understand what real America is or anything that really just kind of gets under my skin, because the guy was working in a laundromat in writing stories to feed his children in the 70s. He understands what it means to be in a different tax bracket. Just because he is the arguably the most famous author on the planet does not mean that he does not understand what real America is or whatever. So it's just
totally ridiculous.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't really want to give any more airtime to this alpha male, but did you have any comments on that or anything, Tiny?
It's just nice that, obviously that article, quote unquote, is a little one-sided, but it seems like most of the people came to Stephen King's defense as opposed to the other guy. So that's good. Yeah. Oh yeah. So, anyway, Steve did not lose any sleep over it, I'm sure. And, I don't know. It's the world is weird. Yeah. But anyway, that's all the news that I have. Do you have any check-ins, Tiny? No, other than starting the Dark Tower, that's my only, starting the Gunslinger, that's my only check-in. Yeah, that's about the same for me. I threw on Salem's Lot on Audible today just for shits and giggles, really. But it's one of my kind of go-to re-listen things I'll do in the background. But
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. It's not my favorite King novel, but I figure that maybe since we're reading the Dark Tower series, I should prime myself with some of the books that tie into the Dark Tower in one way or the other. So I don't know.
Yeah. Right
but yeah. So do you want to get into our first installment of a many installment series on the Dark Tower series?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, great. So let me go ahead and bring us into it. So in this episode, we're going to be covering Chapter 1 of The Gunslinger, titled The Gunslinger. And The Gunslinger as a novel is a really interesting beast in terms of Stephen King's bibliography, because these were initially published as short stories. There are 5 stories. I'm pulling this from, I think, Wikipedia. The 5 stories that constitute the novel were originally published in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. And I have seen on, not recently, but I've seen on eBay and around the internet, the original publications of The Gunslinger and The Way Station and The Oracle and the Mountains and all that. And I'm just oh God, the Calvin Tower in me wants to collect them and have them on display. How great would that be to have the full set? Jesus.
That would be cool.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But anyway, The Gunslinger was originally published in October 1978 in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. And as we usually do a non-spoiler and spoiler review, but since this is a read-along kind of experience, we're not going to do a non-spoiler section. I'm going to go ahead and read the plot summary from this section of the Dark Tower series, and then we're going to go ahead and discuss it, the entirety of it. So fair warning, if you haven't read this section, think of it like a book club. We're going to read this section and then we're going to discuss this section. We won't spoil anything going forward, but here in this section, it's fair game. So are you ready, Tiny?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'm going to read from Wikipedia. The Gunslinger, which was published in October 1978 in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. Here is the summary. As Roland travels across the desert in search of the man in black, whom he knows as Walter, he encounters a farmer named Brown and Zoltan, Brown's raven. Roland spends the night there and recalls his time spent in Tull, a small town Roland passed through not long before the start of the novel. The man in black had also stayed in the town. He brought a dead man stricken by addiction to the opiate-like devil grass back to life and left a trap for Roland. Roland meets the leader of the local church, who reveals to him that the man in black has impregnated her with a demon. She turns the entire town against Roland, and Roland is forced to kill every resident of the town. When he awakens the next day, his mule is dead, forcing him to proceed on foot. So, Tiny, I kind of want to delay our discussion just a little bit because I want to know what your impression is with this being the first time listening to the audiobook. How did you feel about the audiobook experience for this section of The Gunslinger?
I'm really enjoying it because it's nice to hear someone read the kind of mid-earth or end-world language, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Someone, a lot of the characters, instead of saying yeah or yes, will say yar.
Yeah.
and saying it like that, how I just said it, it sounds awkward and goofy, but I think when it's put in the context of the story and it's in the middle of a sentence or it's conversational, it feels a lot more organic and it fits so much better. And a lot of the speech is like that. There's some goofy speech, and thanky sigh is a weird thing to say. It doesn't really, when you're just doing a podcast in 2023, it doesn't really have any gravitas to it. But George Guidall doing his thing with giving voices to all these characters, it fits, and it's so much more appealing, and it gives it so much more weight to hear someone to hear a talented like actor read it out loud, it fits a lot better. And so it's for that reason alone, I kind of wish I had come to these earlier, the audiobooks.
Yeah, the performances in the audiobooks across the board are amazing. Frank Muller does the narration for 2, 3, and 4, I believe. He passed away after a motorcycle accident in between 4 and 5. But his performance is incredible. Like him voicing Eddie Dean is like it is top tier for me. So I'm excited for that to come. But
cool.
but I'm glad that you're audio booking it this time, because the audiobooks are just something really, really special to me. In my estimation. So
nice.
How did you feel about this section? Revisiting this section, it's been a while since you've reread the Dark Tower series. It's been several years, I believe.
Several years. I can't put an actual number on it, but
Nice.
it's been several years.
Nice. So how did you feel about this section and everything? And then I'll share my thoughts when you're done.
Yeah, I felt good about it. I have a passing relationship with the first book. I don't. You were just talking about how it's full Dark Tower and it's great, and you would never tell someone to skip over it. And that's fine, and I'm glad you love it that way. But I still think of it as a little prologue-ish.
Oh yeah,
and maybe that'll change with this read through. I feel like it's the least accessible of the 7 books, and it's kind of it's just kind of goofy. There's a lot of talking and a lot of description. There's not as much action, and so that was sticking out to me for sure on this read through. But it also has the whole toll thing, which is a huge piece of action, and something that it's a piece of action that I've ran through my head multiple times, and seeing imagining the gunslinger Roland doing his hands performing their magic, as it's said in the book, is something that my imagination really runs wild with it, and I love the idea of that. And that's such it's just cool. Like it's a cool badass thing that it's like I don't know what to compare it to, but it's like a lightsaber. Like it's like a Jedi using a lightsaber.
Yeah.
Like it's inherently cool. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And to put it so early in the series was a great idea. And the movie sucked, but
yeah,
there some of that the magic of the gunslinger using his guns was present in that movie, and it was kind of well done, and it was actually pretty cool. Like that's one of the bright spots you can actually point to in that movie, one of the few of them. And I think they did a decent job with that in that movie, and I sort of reference that when I'm reading this part of the book, and when I'm referencing the whole action at Toll. That's sort of what I'm thinking of, and
nice.
I love that part of the book, and I think there's the illustrated version of the book. There's some very cool. Yeah. There's some cool art when it comes to Toll. I that piece of art sticks out in my head. But that's one of the cooler parts of this walk of this read through. It's really about this opening section is about introducing Roland as a character who's been through a lot of stuff. We're in a world that has moved on, and he is chasing this guy across the desert, and he comes and meets a farmer after this kind of traumatic experience in the town of Toll. And it's a really good way to introduce it. Like I didn't necessarily have that opinion in my other read throughs. Like I guess, again, I have the bias of having read through this before, but it's a good place to start, because like I said, it has all those things. It gives us the context of his trauma, and it gives us a little bit of action, and it doesn't throw too much at us at the beginning. It's a good start.
I agree. And what's interesting to me is that in reading this section several times the last couple of weeks, I have come to the conclusion that I believe that this is the perfect way to begin this series. And I think that there are elements to it that obviously stretch out through the entire series. But the thing that I kind of I've been really honing in terms of my appreciation for the series, and one of the things that I talked about this before, but when the news broke that Mike Flanagan had the rights, I saw people being kind of asses about it and saying oh yeah, every episode's gonna have a 10-minute monologue and everything, and my reaction is yes, hell yes, do that.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, and that's specifically because at the Dark Tower's heart, along with it's a melting pot of different genres and different themes and different ideas all put together, but at the center of it, I believe, in my opinion, is the magic of storytelling and the importance of storytelling, of palavering, and
totally.
Yeah, and that's something that goes through the entire series. And I find it so entrancing that we get a small window into that in this section, in this first chapter of the first novel, because this story, this section of the Dark Tower series is a Russian nesting doll of a story. So we've got Roland chasing the man in black, and then he meets Brown, who then gets him to tell him about Toll. And in his telling of Toll, the story goes into an inner flashback of Allie telling Roland about Walter and Nort, and then it goes back to Roland and Allie, and then it goes to the death of Toll, and then back to Roland and Brown, and it's just this entrancing just level of storytelling, level upon level of storytelling. That also acts as the perfect introduction to the protagonist, which is one of the greatest characters in all of Stephen King's multiverse and everything. And it also gives us a taste of how just peculiar the story is going to get, and how weird it is. Little hints here and there, the pianist playing Hey Jude, and the Man in Black's just off the cuff remark about once more with feeling, like they say in The World Next Door, and just little bits and pieces like that. It's just so intoxicating and entrancing, and gives us a lot to chew on in this first section. Yeah, how do you feel about the storytelling structure of this section of the series?
Yeah, that is such a good point. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's another notch on the belt of this series, is that it is a storyteller's story, because there are sections like this part of Tull where he's telling the story to Brown. And that's in this first, the first couple 100 pages or 100 pages of this, 5,000 plus page story. Yeah. And it sort of sets up how important that is. And there's later on in the series, it comes up multiple times, where someone just tells a story, or someone context is a big thing. And this series touches on so many themes. There's adventure, there's love story, there's science fiction, there's horror,
Western,
all that stuff. Western, yeah, and at its core, it's a good versus evil too, which is about as basic as it gets for a storytelling sophomore year literature class. Learning about literature, that's it's such a literary feast in that regard. because it touches on all these themes and it hits all these notes of what it is to tell a good story.
Absolutely.
And I love that you brought that up, because I didn't even think about that context of how storytelling is a part of this story.
Oh,
like it's
absolutely. Like they're
so great.
Yeah. Like there are whole books in this series that are complete flashbacks. Like the entirety of the book is a flashback. And yeah, I love that as this just idea that's present even from the beginning. And so,
and a lot of the conversations aren't just conversations either. That's the other thing. Like part of this, I think if this ever gets adapted, or when this gets adapted, when Roland and Brown are having this storytelling palaver, this conversation, I think there's going to be a ton of subtext. Like I think there's going to be a lot of visual cues, because it's said like I think Brown brings it up. He says a line like, "Have you decided whether or not I'm an enchantment or something like that, like a figment of your imagination, or whatever that the man in black left behind for you."
Yeah.
And and he's like, "If I am, I don't know it," and that's intriguing as hell.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
Right. And like that's not just a couple of guys having a conversation. That's conflict. Like this is that's what I love about Stephen King's writing, and by proxy Mike Flanagan's filmmaking style is conversations and monologues can be conflict. Like it's not just people talking. It's conflict. It's context.
It's advancing the plot. It's
advancing the plot. It's catharsis. It's development. It's all these things, and that's why I love monologues, and I love the way Stephen King writes and Mike Flanagan tells stories. It's so much more than that, and I hate it when people shit on him for that. So
me too. And I want to talk about his scene with Brown, like him meeting Brown and everything. But first, let's go kind of point by point through the different layers of the story. I think that would be kind of the easiest way to go about this. So it starts with, obviously, the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. First of all, iconic. I mean, there's no way around it. The single greatest opening line of anything I've read. It's like, it's incredible. How do you feel about that opening line, Tiny?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. When I read this for the first time, I didn't think much about it. Like, honestly, it didn't necessarily jump out to me. Like, I know that,
interesting.
Yeah, I know Stephen King considers it to be the greatest sentence he's ever written. Which, hey, right on. I mean, there's probably other examples I could think of that I like more in his career. But it is, if you break it down grammatically and contextually and if you want to get into all the literature of it and how it's, it is a very well written sentence, and I like it as a beginning to the story. But it doesn't necessarily have. I don't want to say it doesn't have significance for me, but it doesn't. I don't know. I don't look at it as, it's not what I think about really when I think about The Dark Tower.
Interesting. Yeah, and that's fair. I don't like think about it all that much either, to be frank, but I think that just in the kind of syntax of that opening words of the story, like it brings us right into it. I mean, sure, everything after that is, it's the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. The desert was the apotheosis of all deserts. Empty, I don't know. And then it goes into like this very descriptive descriptions of the hardpan and how Roland is just endlessly chasing the man in black, and how he doesn't even find like his shit. Like he doesn't find any of his waste or anything. He just sees like the remnants of the campfire from the devil grass because it's literally the only thing that will burn. And there's also that description of the devil grass as being this, like the summary said, a kind of opiate kind of substance that I think it's described as luring people into it, and like with the voices, kind of like something else that happens later in the series, but but it has this hypnotic effect and addictive property, which comes into play in Tull and everything. But it's just something that, for a story that is setting up the world that has moved on, which we'll talk about in a bit, it's just such an elegant way to bring us into it with just this iconic sentence. I don't know. I really love it.
Totally. Yeah, I'm not trying to take anything away from it. Yeah.
Oh, no. I understand you hate it. You wanted to start Once Upon a Time, Roland. But no. But that encounter with Brown, I love that because we at this point we don't know why he's chasing the Man in Black. Well, I mean, we know that he's chasing him to get to the Dark Tower. He is someone who is going to lead him to the Dark Tower. We don't understand why he's going to the Dark Tower yet. We don't understand what is pulling him to the Dark Tower. We don't understand any of that. But all we know is the bare bones, that he's chasing this man who holds the key to get to the Dark Tower. That's all we know. But what I love about it in this whole section is this feeling of paranoia throughout Roland, throughout all sections of this section. When he's talking to Brown, he's wondering if he's an enchantment. He's wondering if he is a trap that's set by the Man in Black to kill him. And when he gets to Tull, he wonders where the trap is. What's the trap? And then eventually it leads to Sylvia Pittston, he's wondering, is this the trap and everything? And then the massacre of Tull happens, and it's like he passes a test that is the trap set by the Man in Black. So I don't know, just this feeling of paranoia that goes throughout this entire section is really palpable to me for Roland, and I really like that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So there's a lot of information in his meeting with Brown where he talks about how, like, he's seen, or like leading up to the meeting with Brown as well. He talks about how he's seen a Tahine, that they're looking for Agul Ciento. And he, there was another thing I was going to say that's, talking about, like, one of the early things is it says that, the gunslinger progressed through the Khef and got, to perhaps its 5th level, which in the context of this, it feels like it's supposed to mean that the Khef is this spiritual kind of, meditation that is able to keep you from needing, sustenance in the desert and everything. But I kind of feel like the word Khef changes in the series because I think it's more of a spiritual, well, maybe it doesn't change necessarily, but it's like to share Khef. That's the reason why I'm naming these episodes Khef, is that you're sharing Khef, like you're sharing your soul and your essence with another person, basically. With your commate, Tiny. So yeah, did you have any thoughts on that, and did that stick out to you at all?
It did, because I didn't remember it from my previous read-throughs. But it did jump out to me, and I was, thinking about the logistics of traversing a desert and how hard it would be. And that sort of makes it make more sense that he has that ability, at least at an elementary level or a beginner level, if you will.
Yeah. It's really interesting, the little hints here and there of just like the world and everything, which also brings me, let's talk about the state of the world. That's such a heavy sentence. So it's obviously stated several times the world has moved on. That is a recurring thing that is brought up throughout the entire series. It's one of the kind of like Dark Tower isms that occurs throughout the series. What did you what have you always thought of when you hear the world has moved on? Like, because the actual phrasing is the world had moved on, it had emptied. What is your kind of interpretation of that?
I feel like it's at its core, it's a phrase that's used to describe a phenomena, basically. Because we get some context later in the other books about what happened, but that event and those conflicts didn't necessarily affect everyone and the whole world that this takes place in wasn't directly affected by that, except it created like a cosmic void, or like a magical void that tends to just kind of ruin everything, or just kind of make things not right. Like something is wrong. It's almost like the characters in this universe, it's their way to say that something is wrong, and it's like, this is not the way things used to be, and something has changed, basically. That's kind of how I view it. It's also, I think you could sort of simplify it and say that an apocalyptic event happened. Something apocalyptic happened, and this is the post-apocalypse, and everything is wrong. Nothing is okay. There's no hope. I think it's also sort of a bit of a metaphor for hope. Like, no one has any hope anymore.
Yeah.
Because everything is so messed up. Nothing is. There's no more purity left. Everything is tainted in some way. I think it's kind of all those things wrapped into one, I guess. That's sort of how I interpret it. But it is a very brilliant part of the story, because it encompasses a lot of things. And I think it's a very clever way to describe a kind of a hellscape-ish afterlife kind of post-apocalyptic kind of thing, where you can't necessarily put your thumb on it. And it's I think the biggest thing about it is it's sort of cosmic, or it's kind of magical. It's not necessarily like like, oh, a bomb went off, and after the bomb went off, there's all these things. Like, it's sort of like an all-encompassing thing to describe the malaise and the horribleness of the world they occupy, which is, it's super, super fucking bleak. And it's kind of, I think it could be a turnoff for some readers, because it's very, like, there's not a lot of joy, especially in the Gunslinger. Like, this is a dark ass. I mean, it's dark as hell. I think it gets better in future books, and there's a lot of joy, but like, it's bleak. And I think when we find those bleak moments, that's what the characters do.
Yeah.
The characters just like, the world has moved on, and that's just kind of their explanation.
That's I love the way that you put that, because that the level of it being cosmic and out of control and everything is really interesting. Is really unique, because on the surface it feels like a post-apocalyptic story. It feels like a post-atom bomb story. It feels like the kind of story, because like, when he gets to Tull and he has the hamburgers, and she says like, oh, it comes from threaded stock, and he's like, yeah, threaded stock my ass. This had probably like 3 eyes and four heads or something. That gives to me like this idea of like, oh, atomic weaponry and nuclear holocaust and mutations and everything, which is something that is hinted at and pervasive throughout the story or throughout the series. But there is also that cosmic energy, that idea that time moves different, and like the way that Allie says, like, time's funny out here, because there's no way of telling how time is going and everything. Like there's no sense of time. It just feels like everything's spinning off in the wrong direction and the wrong speed. So I think that that's an interesting way of melding like a kind of science fiction-y and fantasy idea with the more sadly like realistic version or realistic idea of a post-apocalypse or a nuclear holocaust or anything. And it paints just a very vivid picture, as vague as it is.
Right.
Vague and vivid, if that can be said without being completely contradictory.
It's oxymoronic.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about Tull. Because something I found interesting, I'm going to go on kind of a little bit of a soapbox here. And I'm going to say that the reason why I think that this is the perfect introduction to the Dark Tower series is because at its heart, this has so many elements of Stephen King's tropes and the things that he works well within, but in a very different context. So once Roland gets to Tull and he's telling the story about him being in Tull, and then it turns into the story of the Man in Black coming to Tull, and then it comes back to Roland and Tull and Sylvia Pittston and everything. Like the hallmarks of this, like when you look at it from the outside in the broad strokes, this is a classic Stephen King narrative. A wanderer goes into a small town, a small community, and affects change within that community to some respect. He interacts with the characters of that community, and then that community is under the spell of a religious zealot, and there's a dark religious force at its center and everything, and there's this weird supernatural element to it as well. And then the hero of the story has to do something drastic at the end. And like, that feels like a classic Stephen King narrative. Like just even like when listening to Salem's Lot, Ben Mears, Ben Mears goes into Salem's Lot and meets a woman, and then he's just interacting with people and everything. Like, that is a trope of Stephen King. Like, Under the Dome, Barbie, he's just in Chester's Mill and he's interacting with the town and everything. Here, Roland is just in like the only place within like that's mappable distance that is populated, and there is a town killing event that occurs. And I just find that to be really interesting, and I think that that's why this is the perfect entry point, because for people who are fans of Stephen King, they can see the markings of Stephen King even in this very wild, crazy, out there premise. I think the skeleton of it is still very much Stephen King. Did you make any of those connections?
Yeah, I think so, especially now that you said it. Yeah, that's totally it totally touches on his tropes and his kind of bag of tricks. But to add to that, it's also, Tull is like kind of a microcosm for what's happened in this world. You know, there's no towns or cities that are thriving anywhere. You know, this is the result of the world moving on, and this is, you know, people aren't like they're not like, they don't have like jobs. There's no hope. The kids aren't getting any education. There's no, it's hard to come by water. No one experiences any luxury. No one has any money. It's just it's kind of a hellscape, I guess. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but it's, you know, there's just no there's no hope. Again, there's no hope. There's just no hope at all. Like no one has anything to look forward to. It's not a joyous thing if someone has a baby or gets pregnant. Right. It's not particularly sad if someone dies, because like, hey, at least it's over for them. At least they get to get out of this shit, you know. And it's just, again, super bleak, but it's it paints a vivid picture to kind of steal your phrase there.
Yeah, and if someone dies, some guy will come and resurrect him.
Right. But it's also, again, to kind of put it in context to the whole story, like this happens again where Roland or who other characters come upon a town, and it's a lot like Tull. Like they're all very worn down, tiny population. No one's happy. There's no hope. Everything is just droll and horrible and dreary. And it's a good introduction, and it's just kind of a microcosm for what's going on in this universe.
Yeah, absolutely. And just I like that small element. This is kind of I don't know. This is kind of a light part of it. But basically, when Roland is with Allie and Sheb comes in and attacks them with the knife and everything, that also kind of just tells you so much more about the atmosphere of Tull, because like Allie is someone who she has an itch that she used to be able to scratch but can't scratch anymore. So Roland, come on and give it to me. But Sheb is someone who, like, it's just an interesting kind of small town idea that he felt possessive of Allie because he hooked up with her and everything. And it's just, I don't know, that sense of community that comes in when she like calls him an ass and says like, how are you going to make your money like playing the piano? Because you just broke your hand and everything. It's still like that kind of caring community and everything of like, okay, well, let me look at it and see how it is, even though you just pulled a knife on me and the Gunslinger. So I don't know. Did that resonate with you at all?
No, I guess I didn't really pick up on that very much. I mean, I remember that part, but
yeah. Well, it's a little bit overshadowed by Roland recognizing him from Magus, which we'll talk about eventually.
Right. Yeah, that's what stuck out to me about that conflict or that interaction.
Yeah, which I think is one of the slight detriments to it being revised. We talked about it a little bit on Patreon, but just the idea of it being revised to add in a lot of like lingo and stuff, and a lot of the world building, or a lot of the references that have been that have been fleshed out throughout the series. It seems a little bit direct when, without those references and everything, this is a very wonderfully told story of this man wandering a wasteland. So I don't know, but it's a minor complaint. Should we talk about the flashback to the Man in Black coming to Tull and resurrecting Nort?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is our introduction to the Man in Black, as this sorcerer person who is able to manipulate things to his liking using kind of magical properties. He brings Nort back to life, who was a weed eater addict who died and was resurrected. And one of the things that stuck out to me in this section is when Nort goes to Allie. I think it's when he's talking to Allie, and he asks why the Man in Black didn't make me, like, he could have made me not want it, but I still want the devil's grass. Like, I still want it. Why did he do this? If he could do this, why did he still make me want it? And I'm like, that is the Man in Black. Like, he's this mischievous character, and he is evil, basically. And it's just, I don't know. I felt like that was a really interesting window into the general chicanery of the Man in Black. Yeah. How did you feel about his interactions in Tull?
Yeah. I what kind of jumped out to me is it sort of sets the tone of the Man in Black being a little like he's definitely what you said. He's evil, he's mischievous, but he kind of has this like a court jester quality to him. And I think that sort of plays out in here in this part of the story, because when they're describing the resurrection of Mort, he's like Nort, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, that's fine.
He's like jumping around and like jumping over him and like hollering and howling like a wolf, and he's like super over the top. And like if I'm picturing this in my head, it's like it's kind of dumb and like kind of it's just weird. Like if you like, again, I can't help but imagine this as a movie or a show or whatever,
right?
And I compile these scenes in my head, and this scene is goofy. Like it's hard to visualize it without it being goofy and over the top. That's what kind of jumps out to me about it, and I think it could be edited and captured in a appealing way, in a menacing way, however you want it to be. But I feel like the way it's written in the book is just sort of goofy, and like I kind of like crack a smile when I was reading it or listening to it. And I'm like, well, really? He's jumping around and spitting on him and howling like a wolf or whatever. Like that's just kind of over the top and goofy to me.
I can understand that. And I definitely understand where you're coming from. But the image I have in my head is Heath Ledger's Joker when after the car chase, when he is jumping around on like when one of his henchmen gets shocked by Batman's suit, and then he's jumping around and everything. He's like buzz buzz. Like he's very animated. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting from it.
Okay.
But I think
fair.
I think the Man in Black he's just a larger than life character. Like you said, he's like a court jester, magician person, who I think that the juxtaposition of Roland being this just this very not stereotypical, but this archetypical, Western ideal, like Western gunslinger character archetype. Like he's patterned after, Clint Eastwood's work and like the Man with No Name trilogy. And his work, and like he is the epitome of like a Western figure. To have that juxtaposed with this sorcerer who is able to, who has like this mischievous evil within him. Like the whole idea of him leaving a note for Allie saying like, hey, the word is 19. Say 19 to Nort and he will tell you everything you need to know about death and what's beyond. By the way, that number again is 19. And so like just puts into her brain this idea that like, I'm going to say it. There's no way I'm not going to say it. And she does it. And which by the way, having read Revival, I can't help but just imagine that like what Nort told Allie was that it like basically I'm imagining that he just read the end of Revival to her. Like that's
nice.
that's my headcanon for that scene in the Gunslinger.
That's a cool connection. I hadn't thought of that. That's really good. Yeah. Nice.
Thank you. So the Man in Black wreaks his havoc and everything. And let's talk, let's kind of move on and talk about, well, do you have anything else to say about the Man in Black or Roland and Allie?
Not really, no.
Okay.
No.
Okay, let's talk about Sylvia Pittston then. And this is another like Stephen King connection that I just love. It is him exploring this dark religion, this kind of evil Christianity to an extent. Like it's stuff that is all over his work, obviously, like Carrie and other works and everything, Revival even. But like just this dark religion, and that's something that stood out to me here. This read through is the way that Sylvia Pittston, like, I mean, okay, this was initially published in 1978, and it's sad that like I can see correlations to today, because like her sermon about the interloper is like it is projection. It is her saying that, like, oh, the interloper will come and he is the Antichrist and he will bring about he'll like birth a child for the Crimson King and everything. Like she says all of this, and then in the next scene when Roland confronts her, she's like, yeah, I'm pregnant with the demon child of the Crimson King. I'm the person that I was preaching about to my entire congregation as if it was you. And it's just like that level of projection in terms of kind of dark religion and spreading hate really affected me this read through. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, I had kind of forgotten about the Sylvia Pittston character.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, because it's really kind of memorable and terrifying.
Well, it kind of gets overshadowed by just the whole massacre of Toll.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, totally. And, I love that sermon because it's just so evil and wicked, and it's mischievous. It's meddling. It's meddling mischievousness, like the Man in Black does.
Yeah.
So it's great for that. And I had kind of, I think I had kind of forgotten about her because I sort of had a misconception or a different idea of what the massacre actually was.
Oh,
at Tull.
interesting.
And so I think that's kind of why I had sort of forgotten about her.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I like the scene a lot, and it's sort of foreshadowing for some future stuff that obviously I'm not going to talk about yet. But
I wish we would have went into that in Patreon. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I didn't think of it either. But
next time we'll talk about it on Patreon. Right.
One thing I kind of want a clarification on, and I hope you get this or you got it, was I'm not sure of the, for lack of a better word, the mechanics of what he did when he removed the demon from her. I don't really understand. And I'm not sure if we're supposed to understand.
I don't think so. Yeah.
I don't think it's supposed to be clear cut what he actually did. Like, it's sort of like he drew his guns.
Mm-hmm.
Did he fire his gun? Did he pardon the crudeness of this, did he insert the barrel of the gun inside of her? Like, I don't know what he did, but I know it's fucked up. Like, it's like I'm disturbed. It's funny because it's not explicit, but it's still very disturbing.
It is incredibly disturbing, and it is intentionally vague as well. I don't know exactly what the mechanics were, and I remember that when friend of the show Kim C over at the Year of Underrated Stephen King, I remember she got to that point in the Gunslinger, and like I remember in her episode she was talking about how she reread over that over and over again, trying to figure out what exactly it was, and she was kind of at a loss too. So I kind of had that in the back of my mind when I was reading through it this time, and the best I can make of it is that I don't think he fired the gun into her, but there is that just really cringy, just disgusting description of her body pulling the gun into her, I think, to an extent. But I think that there's a slight reference to the magic of the guns, and like that makes me think maybe there's some kind of metaphysical force that comes from the guns that, without like firing it into her, essentially just aborts the child.
Okay.
I don't know what to make of that really, except to just clear my throat very obnoxiously in the middle of speaking. But I really don't know what to make of that. I think that it's supposed to be this kind of metaphysical enchantment that he does. Like maybe it's supposed to be a slight hint that he has some kind of like sorcery in him. And maybe like the best I can describe, or the best I can kind of rationalize that, is that maybe King had that idea in his mind when he wrote it. Maybe he had the idea that Roland is able to do magic like the Man in Black is, and then maybe he just decided to just not do that anymore. Like maybe that was it. So I don't know. But
it's still super effective. So it's not. It doesn't necessarily matter what he did.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and like it's an interesting piece of horror in this. Like I said, this melting pot of different genres and everything. So like for the most part, this is a post-apocalyptic Western story. And like we get shades of horror with this, and with Nort being resurrected, and then with the massacre as well. And it's a really interesting just blend of so many different things. Yeah. Having said that, do you want to talk about the gunfight, the massacre of Tull at the hand of Roland Deschain?
Yeah, and I'll kick it off by saying I think I was under the misconception, and I think it is a misconception, that I the first 2 times I had read this, I thought that when Allie says the word 19 to Nort, that it triggers some kind of enchantment or some kind of whatever spell that takes over the people of the town and essentially turns them into like attacking zombies that are supposed to attack Roland and take him out and kill him. Right. That's what I thought happened. I'm pretty sure that's not what happens. Like basically, Sylvia just brainwashes everyone and convinces everyone that Roland is the interloper and that he has to be cut out or killed or whatever. And it's just good old brainwashing, which is honestly like kind of better than an enchantment than zombies, because it's not magic. Like the Man in Black is so menacing because he can do spells and sorcery and magic, but in order to do this, to seriously wound and almost kill the gunslinger, the only gunslinger that's left, he just basically brainwashes people. Yeah, and just through that action, he's able to. Because I mean, I think at the end of it, I don't mean to jump ahead, but at the end of it, there's a line about how he's got like 20 wounds, and he kind of gets his ass kicked. Well, like he gets hit with stuff, and he's bleeding. And
here's the thing about that: it mentions that every wound is pretty much superficial, except for the cut to his calf, and I found that to be really interesting because that is done to him by a child, and I think that that's an interesting just piece of information to kind of just give us that like the only like non-superficial wound is from the hand of a child. And I think that just really helps to bring out the abject horror of what happened in Tull and how like they lost their damn minds because of Sylvia Pittston, by the Man in Black, by proxy. I just thought that was an interesting kind of like flourish to be like, the one serious wound came at the hand of a child, just like the symbol of innocence, like that is there. I really like that amidst all the horror of the massacre, really. And kind of on a macro level, I guess, just the idea of the gunslinger. The book is called The Gunslinger, and it is about the last gunslinger in a world that has moved on. And this man is someone who has devoted his life to being able to keep the peace with guns. Like that's his trade. He is a gunslinger. And the sole action set piece in this section, in the first section of this series, is him just murdering an entire town of men, women, and children that are under the spell of brainwashing and everything. Like unarmed men, women, and children are killed at the hands of the gunslinger in this. And I think that that's just such a ballsy introduction, because this is not, it's telling us that this is not like an action-packed Western. This isn't Roland finding a town and defending it or anything. That comes later.
Right.
And that has its own mess of problems too. But yeah, like in terms of like his experience and everything. But here we just have him just murdering unarmed people to defend himself. And it's such an interesting, ballsy way to bring us into this story that is, on its surface, built around an archetype of like the Western genre archetype of a hero. So I just really like that. I've always liked that part of it.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback off that, I think it helps establish, or kind of drives the last swing of the hammer on the nail of the idea that Roland he's kind of an anti-hero. He's not just the blatant good guy, because he's, throughout this section of this book, he's basically using Allie. They're using each other pretty much. There's no love there. It's not. He makes other comments throughout this section that are very heartless. He talks about like when he's talking to Brown, he's like, "Have you ever thought about eating that raven?" Oh yeah. And it's like, dude, like it can talk, like it has a
right.
It's more like his pet. Like, you're gonna eat your pet. Like, I don't know. It's like and there's little comments like that and other things that he says that are more in the category of an anti-hero and someone who's not necessarily likable, and doesn't necessarily do the right thing. He does the next thing that gets him through his journey and gets him on to the next part. It's not about right or wrong, at least this point of the story. And this is another example of that. He's like, I don't want to use the word murder because he's being attacked, and the people are armed in a way, because like a lot of people are carrying knives, and
that's fair. Yeah,
they're carrying weapons, so like there's an element of self-defense. I'm not trying to go all George Zimmerman here, but like
Jesus,
I know. I mean, there's an element of self-defense, but at the same time, he could have ran away. I mean, like there's other. He didn't necessarily have to kill all these people, but kinda had to. I don't know. And again, these people are all under the brainwashing of the Man in Black, so they're sort of collateral damage. But at the he doesn't. What's funny is, after this amazing conflict where the guns are roaring and making their music, and they're described that way, which is sort of melodious and celebratory in a way. It's, like a piece of art, and it's just like, he's killing people, bro.
Right.
After all that, he goes to sleep, and he stays in the town amongst presumably dozens of bodies.
Yeah.
And gets up and leaves in the morning, and like, that's some cold-hearted shit, man. I mean, he's not just a good guy. He's not, like you were saying, he's not necessarily the archetypical hero, especially in a Western context. He's it's interesting, and it's really pretty cool.
Yeah, that's, at the end of the day, it is very cool. Like you said, the illustrated edition, like the artwork of that, like with him, and I think it's in the comics as well. Him standing just amidst this row of dead people that is at his feet is something that stuck with me. Like, the artwork is really, really incredible.
Yeah. And just I don't know, I don't want to go on a tangent here, but if you, the art and skill of operating a revolver, a revolver gun is incredible. Like, if anyone's ever curious, go on YouTube and just watch like some of the best shooters in the world work a revolver. Like, that's what this story is describing. And like, I think it may be hard for some people to imagine what he's doing, but like he's, the way reloading a revolver is cumbersome at best. Like it is a slow, you're grabbing an individual bullet and sliding it into a chamber and then you rotate. I mean, it is a whole thing, and it's not something you want to be doing when you're being attacked by a group of people. And the imagination, the way my imagination runs with that is amazing. And like the visual that pop into my head from the writing in this is incredible. And I love the descriptions of I wish I could remember the exact wording, but something about the roaring of the guns and their the guns doing their thing. Gosh, I wish I could remember the exact wording, but it's kind of poetic, and you're describing killing someone, and it's but it's in the context of just this I don't want to say badass, but just this kind of necessary thing. Like this is what these guns are for. It's for killing people, and they're doing their thing. Yeah, and it's impressive, and it is a statement, and that's what Roland is for. Like that's what he is. He is a gunslinger, and I love that. I love the introduction of that whole sequence. Really, is Allie saying like, "Oh, I said the word. I saw it. You need to kill me, please." And then, I think the wording is something to the effect of Roland. His hands were able to do the thing that she asked because that's what they were made for. Like that's what he's made for. He's built for it. Like thousands of years of history is in his fingertips to do the thing that she's asking of him. And it's the scope of that is really, really amazing. My kind of homework for you, Tiny, is if you can find a YouTube video of someone doing like a speed reload of revolvers that could be approximated to being like Roland's reloading trick, because that's always been something that's been a little bit like hard for me to kind of visualize. I can visualize it pretty well, but I think that it's, I don't know. I want to see like someone like a badass reloading a revolver like that. So totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we're kind of going to wind down a bit. That is the first section. Afterwards, he talks to Brown. The mule is dead, and Zoltan ate the eyes. And so Roland is then on his way to his next adventure. Tiny, any final thoughts on Chapter 1, The Gunslinger? Any thoughts on anything that we didn't touch on that you want to talk about?
Not necessarily anything we didn't touch on, but just to kind of reiterate the effectiveness of it, and I kind of have a new appreciation of this opening. I think I what always jumped out to me was Tull, and the coolness of that, for lack of a word, that's what kind of comes. It's just cool, and it's memorable and fun, and it's a big action piece. But reading through it this time, there's a ton of meat on the bone of this introduction, and it's way better than I remember. And again, to just reiterate, I love the audiobooks are shedding new light on it, and just I really love the performance aspect of audiobooks, and there's some really talented voice actors out there who do a great job, and I think this is going to be one of them.
Oh, absolutely. I like, as an anecdote, years ago, and I've talked about it on the podcast with no shame, because I have no shame for it, because it's a cool thing. But I remember, like, I had ripped the audiobooks and put them together into one massive audio file, like a massive MP3 that was every book in the Dark Tower series in chronological order in one file. And I would press play on it when I go to sleep, and like I would just listen to 6 to 8 hours worth of the Dark Tower series, like while I was asleep. And like that was my white noise while I slept. Unfortunately I lost that file when my laptop died a few years ago, but fond memories of that nonetheless. So, yeah.
Nice.
So I have no real parting thoughts. I think, once again, just to reiterate, I think this is a perfect introduction to not only the Dark Tower series, but to the character of Roland Deschain. And something we didn't really talk about that I wanted to highlight here is that we don't even know Roland's name until Allie calls him that at the end of this section. And I think that is just so, just for lack of a better word, cool and mysterious. I love that. It just speaks to the air of mystery of Roland Deschain, who we don't even know his last name is Deschain. We don't know anything about the line of Eld, Stephen Deschain. We know nothing. And I love it because, yeah. And also, to your point, Tiny, about this being a kind of badass section, like, the more we have long said that, like, yeah, an adaptation of the Dark Tower series would be great as like a five season TV series. And like, all I'm thinking is like, this section could be like a limited series, like each section of the Gunslinger, the shortest novel in the Dark Tower series, has enough meat on the bones to facilitate an entire like limited series of like 8 to 10 episodes, I'm sure. And it's so weird to me that they didn't start the Dark Tower movie with this. Like, it's right there, man. So
yeah. I mean, just Tull could have been a prequel limited series. Like, like you said, like 8 or 10 episodes. Totally, I could totally see it.
Oh yeah. Okay, well, I think that will just about do it. Tiny, next time on the podcast, we might do an episode in between, but the next time we do a Khef episode, we're going to cover The Waystation, which is chapter 2 of the Gunslinger. It was originally published in April 1980 in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. We're going to talk about The Waystation. I'm very excited. The Patreon thing is going to be fun for that too. So once again, consider signing up on Patreon, patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. We have several different tiers you can join, but if you want just Stephen King content, we have a $4 per month Patreon tier that is just Stephen King related stuff. There's a bunch already up there of movie commentary tracks and book reviews, and I did a whole read-along review of Fairy Tale. I did a read-along review of Billy Summers. I did like story-by-story reviews of Night Shift and Skeleton Crew and a couple other short story collections that I can't remember right now. But anyway, a lot of stuff on there. Check out patreon.com/obsessiveviewer, and more Patreon stuff is going to be coming up there as well. Tiny, any parting thoughts for our listeners?
Can't wait to keep going. Just looking forward to it. Yeah,
me too. I'm so amped. I'm so excited. So, all right, I'm gonna start playing us out so that I can start listening to The Waystation and making notes. So once again, thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope you guys are going on this journey with us. It's gonna be a long one, but The Dark Tower is incredible. We love it, and we hope you love it too, which if you're listening to this, I'm sure you do. So anyway, thank you guys so much for listening. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.
And now, enjoy this short clip from our Patreon exclusive RSS feed. For the full clip and more exclusive Patreon content, such as early access to episodes, TV, book, and movie reviews and reaction recordings, commentary tracks, and Patreon potpourri episodes, go to patreon.com/obsessiveviewer and become a patron at the minimum rate of $1 per month. Thank you and enjoy.
That kind of worries me, but I'm still excited because it's been several years since I've read through it. So
yeah, and that's really interesting because we came to this series, we read it together in 2010, and that was, like you said, we were both living at home. We did not have any responsibilities. We both worked a nothing job where literally we were paid to sit on our ass for 8 hours and do nothing. So that time was spent reading, that time was spent fantasizing, that time was spent fan casting and just talking about like how we would want to do the series, how we would want the series to be, and just like talking about the inner workings of it. And like, that's something that, you know, will never happen again. Like we will never have that experience ever again. To have that level of, just have that level of really freedom to just dive into a piece of art. Because we're adults now. we have responsibilities and everything. So it's really interesting to think about that, to think about the series in terms of where we were when we came to it and where we are now.
This podcast was edited and produced by Matt Hurt and presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. You can find links to all of our shows at ObsessiveViewer.com/podcasts. For exclusive bonus content, including reviews, commentaries, and B-roll episodes, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/ObsessiveViewer. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.